I remember the moment my world fractured like glass dropped on concrete. The day I came home to a silent house and an empty closet. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, scrawled in her hurried handwriting. Gone to Paris with the girls. Be back soon. At first, I felt only a mild twinge of annoyance that she hadn't discussed it beforehand. Then the hours dragged into days, the days into weeks, and the twinge became a deep, twisting dread in my gut. That was when her invitation arrived. An ornate card in the mail, proclaiming her upcoming marriage to someone else. And just like that, my life as I knew it vanished. People often talk about the calm before a storm, but in my marriage, the calm was more like a gentle hum of routine. My wife, Natalie, and I had been together for almost 9 years, enough time to settle into each other's rhythms. We fell asleep to the same TV shows, bickered about groceries, and occasionally splurged on a fancy date night. Nothing seemed unusual in the days leading up to her disappearance. I even recall her complaining about a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the dining table. You promised we'd solve it together, she teased. I brushed it off, confident we had time. There was always time. Then came the day I arrived home from work to find the place quieter than usual. No lingering scent of her lavender shampoo, no half-finished coffee cup on the counter. I brushed it aside, assuming she'd stepped out to run errands, maybe to pick up that new blouse she mentioned. But the hours ticked by, the sun sank behind the neighborhood roofs, and she never returned. Eventually my phone chimed. A single text, heading to Paris. Girls' trip. I'll call. My mind reeled, no prior mention, no talk of traveling. She was spontaneous, sure, but never this abrupt. Still, I tried not to overreact. Maybe it was an impulsive decision arranged by her old college friends. A cheap flight deal, a chance to see the Eiffel Tower. Natalie always did crave spontaneous adventure. I responded with a single question mark. She replied with a heart emoji and the words, "Trust me. I need this." Then nothing more. I waited, thinking she'd text me a flight itinerary or a quick landed safe, but the phone stayed silent. By the third day, my annoyance had spiked to worry. No calls, no new messages, no random social media updates from her or the so-called girlfriends. I tried calling her phone repeatedly. It rang until voicemail, that standard robotic female voice instructing me to leave a message. I left many, each more frantic than the last. On the 5th day, I contacted her parents. They were as clueless as I was, only certain she'd told them about a short vacation. My chest grew tight, the knot of dread pulling tighter. Was she in danger? Then on the 6th day, I got a brief text. All good. Busy. We'll text soon. No explanation, no apology. Just that. I felt an equal surge of relief and anger. If she was safe enough to text me, why wasn't she giving me any real details? By day 10, panic gnawed so deeply I considered contacting the authorities. But each time I hovered over the phone, I hesitated. A small voice told me maybe she was just being reckless, that the police would treat me like an overreacting spouse. So I waited day after day, suspended in a haze of confusion. A house of unraveling threads. The days crawled by until nearly 3 weeks had passed with no new word from her. My mind conjured wild scenarios. Kidnapping, hostage situations, or maybe just a rebellious fling. I started sleeping on the couch as if expecting a knock at the door or a midnight call demanding ransom. Neighbors asked after Natalie, but I was too embarrassed to admit I didn't have answers. Meanwhile, the jigsaw puzzle on the dining table remained untouched, a taunting reminder of the life we'd paused. Then a single envelope arrived in the mail, a fancy cream-colored envelope with ornate cursive letters. I almost discarded it as a wedding invitation from some distant cousin, but the swirling script read, "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell cordially invite you." Wait, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell? I frowned, flipping it over. The return address was from an upscale event planner in Paris. My chest tightened as I slid open the envelope. In gold foil, it invited me to the wedding of Natalie Caldwell and Lucien Bouchard. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month at a lavish Parisian estate, complete with black tie recommended at the bottom. My stomach lurched, disbelief exploding like a bombshell in my chest. Natalie Caldwell, my wife, was apparently marrying someone else. My vision blurred and I nearly dropped the invitation. I scanned for details, an RSVP card, directions, a note. Join us for a joyous occasion. Joyous? My wife was forging a new life, apparently in Paris, with a man I'd never heard of. And she'd had the audacity to invite me? In the back of my mind, something snapped. Anger, sorrow, betrayal all collided. Our home phone rang almost immediately as if on cue, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Instead, I sank onto the floor, the invitation trembling in my hand, tears burning my eyes. The woman I'd shared every dream with, the partner I'd cuddled each winter night, had left me in the dust for a man named Lucien, and had the gall to send an invitation as though this were some sitcom wedding episode. It was madness, or some twisted joke. Seeking answers. I spent the next few hours numb, reading the invitation over and over until the words lost meaning. Then, fueled by desperation, I dialed her phone again. Straight to voicemail. I texted her a photo of the invitation. What the hell is this? No response. My mind reeled. Lucien Bouchard? Who is he? Is this real? Finally, after a sleepless night of pacing, I decided to rummage through her closet, searching for any clue I might have missed. The space was emptier than I remembered, a scattering of hangers, a few neglected sweaters, her worn sneakers tossed aside. A sense of finality pressed down on me. She'd taken most of her clothes. On the top shelf, I found a small travel diary, half buried beneath a stack of old magazines. My heart raced as I flipped it open, scanning her hasty handwriting. Most of it was dated from months prior, referencing a trip to Europe. Mentions of Lucien, art gallery, opportunity to see more, Paris in spring? The last few pages were torn out. But I gleaned enough to suspect this plan might have been brewing for some time. She'd known someone named Lucien, apparently connected to an art scene, and she'd withheld that from me. I recalled a conversation we had half a year ago, when she'd come home excited about an invitation to a French art show. She said a friend recommended it. I never pressed for details. Life was busy and I had midterms to grade. Could that have been the seed of this entire fiasco? A confrontation across the sea. Days blurred into a haze of frantic planning. I called my older brother Liam, who lived out of state. He advised me to be cautious, reminding me that I might be walking into a trap. Maybe she wanted to provoke me, or maybe the wedding was fake. But I couldn't ignore it. My heart demanded closure, demanded I see with my own eyes if this was truly happening. So I booked a flight to Paris. It felt insane, draining my savings just to chase a ghost of my marriage. But the thought of cowering at home while my wife remarried in a swirl of lace and lies was unbearable. Maybe if I confronted her face to face, I'd glean some explanation. The flight was long and suffused with dread. I barely slept, mind whirling with visions of Natalie gliding down an aisle to meet her wealthy French fiancé. Could love die so swiftly? Upon arrival, the city's beauty felt like a cruel contrast to my turmoil. Paris glimmered with elegance, busy cafes, cobblestone streets, flower-laden balconies. I felt like an intruder in its romance. Clutching the wedding invitation, I navigated to the address scribbled for the ceremony's location. The estate was a grand chateau on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by manicured lawns and ornate fountains. My taxi driver gave me a sympathetic glance, probably noting my disheveled hair and hollow eyes. He wished me luck, and I murmured a weary thanks, stepping onto the gravel driveway. The day before the wedding, the chateau bustled with staff preparing for a lavish event. Rows of chairs lined the garden, tables draped in white linen, and florists affixed roses in arches. I felt out of place, an interloper. Striding up to a cluster of event planners, I forced out a polite, shaky question. "I'm looking for the bride, Natalie Caldwell?" They exchanged puzzled glances, likely noticing my American accent and uncertain demeanor. A young woman in a headset asked for my name. I told her. Her eyes widened. She motioned for me to follow. We weaved through corridors, passing elaborate portraits and vintage rugs, until we reached a side lounge. She told me to wait. My pulse thundered in my ears. Minutes later, Natalie emerged. She wore a loose sundress, hair pinned up in a messy bun, a swirl of tension etched in her features. Her eyes flicked over me, mouth twisting into a guilty grimace. "You came," she said, voice trembling. I let out a shaky breath. "What did you expect? You vanished, then invited me to your wedding. Are you out of your mind?" My anger simmered, threatening to boil over. She folded her arms, gaze darting around to ensure no one else heard us. "I knew you'd come eventually," she admitted quietly. I needed you to see. It's real and it's happening tomorrow." I stared at her, struggling to speak. "So you planned this for weeks, months? Why do you want me here? To humiliate me? Or is there some twisted sense of closure you're after?" She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "It's not about humiliation. I just felt you had a right to know. Lucien insisted I send you an invitation, said it was the honorable thing." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "He thought we parted ways amicably, that I told you everything. I told him we were separated. That's what he believes." My anger flared. "Separated? We were married, living together when you fled. That's not separation, that's desertion. She winced. I know. Please, let's talk somewhere private. She led me to a small parlor, its walls lined with antique books. The tension thickened as we stood among dusty tomes, as though they bore witness to the secrets we'd concealed. I never meant for it to unravel like this, she began, voice trembling. Lucien was an escape. I felt stagnant. Our life was suffocating me. I latched onto him, some romantic idea of Paris. But it got serious fast. He proposed, I panicked but said yes. She inhaled sharply. I told him I was technically married, but we'd been estranged for a year. I needed to keep up the illusion. And then the wedding date got set and I realized I couldn't hide forever. My heart pounded. You couldn't just file for divorce? Talk to me like an adult? She lowered her head. I was afraid. It was easier to run. I thought you'd hate me. But I never expected you to actually come. Rage and sorrow twisted my gut. I wanted to shout that I indeed hated her, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead I asked, do you love him? Enough to marry him tomorrow and never look back? Her eyes glistened. I think I love the idea of him, his artistry, his ambition, his worldliness. He's so different from what we had, from you. She paused, voice breaking. But I'm not sure anymore. I've been sick with guilt since I left. I tried to keep up the fantasy, but seeing you here, she buried her face in her hands, trembling. I struggled to contain the swirl of bitterness. So you dragged me across the ocean to watch you marry a man you're not even certain you want? She wiped tears fiercely. I invited you because you deserve truth. If I went through with this without telling you... Stop, I snapped, words laced with pain. You're rewriting the narrative. You didn't think about me when you ran off. Don't act like a martyr now. My chest heaved. Are you actually going to marry him tomorrow, or is this some last-minute meltdown? A hush fell. She stared at the floor, tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know, she whispered. Everything here is so beautiful, so new. But maybe it's all a grand illusion. I don't know how to face him or you or my own regrets. I felt my anger soften into a profound sadness. Natalie, I loved you with everything I had. But you left me in the worst way. You can't unburn that bridge by crying about it now. If you truly want to be with Lucien, just do it. But be honest with him, and me. My voice cracked. Stop pretending we parted amicably. Because that's not reality. She nodded, tears dripping. You're right, she whispered. I've made so many mistakes. On the eve of I do. We parted, heavy with unresolved emotions. She returned to the swirl of wedding preparations, forced smiles for the florists and caterers. I roamed Paris aimlessly, numb to the city's enchantment. That night, I lay awake in a cramped hotel room, picturing her in some fancy bridal suite, tears on her pillow. Should I intervene? Should I just vanish? My heart tugged in conflicting directions, but I reminded myself, she's the one who left. This is her consequence. Morning dawned, overcast. The wedding was set for midday. Against all logic, I dressed in a simple blazer, unsure if I'd even show up. Yet, some masochistic drive propelled me to the chateau. Arriving, I found guests milling about, elegantly dressed. I recognized no one. They sipped champagne, admired the floral arches, spoke in French too fast for me to follow. I lingered in the corner, grappling with the absurdity of witnessing my wife's vow renewal to another man. Moments before the ceremony, I spotted Lucien stepping out of a side door. He was tall, handsome, exuding an air of cultivated sophistication. When our eyes met, he approached with a polite smile. "Ah, you must be the friend from America?" he greeted in accented English. "Natalie told me you came to wish her well." My stomach churned. So that was the story she spun. Yes, I lied, forcing a civil nod. He glanced around, ensuring no eavesdroppers. "She told me you two parted on amicable terms, that you used to be close, but it ended." He hesitated, earnest concern coloring his features. "Is that truly the case?" Every cell in my body screamed to reveal the truth. That she left me, her husband, for this fantasy. That we never parted amicably. But one look at his sincere expression gave me pause. This man was a victim of her half-truths too, no matter how glamorous he seemed. He deserved honesty as well. "We were married," I said quietly, voice shaking. "She only told me of this wedding recently." His face paled. "Married?" "She said it was a short-lived union that ended last year. She insisted the divorce was finalized." Shock twisted his features as the reality sank in. "My God, you're her legal husband?" I nodded, heartbreak and pity mingling in me. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, but I deserve closure." So do you? He ran a hand through his meticulously styled hair, a wave of dread crossing his face. I can't believe she lied, he murmured. We set this entire event. I have family who flew in from across Europe. He pressed a hand over his mouth, realization unraveling him. I asked her about her past, but she was vague. I never suspected this. Tense silence enveloped us. The wedding was moments away, yet the groom now stood thunderstruck by the lies. I placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, a gesture of unspoken empathy. You deserve the truth. She's not the woman you think she is. She may care about you, but she's been dishonest from the start. Tears gathered in his eyes. I love her, he whispered, voice cracking. But how can I marry someone who hides such a betrayal? My guests, the ceremony? My heart clenched. For a second, we were two men both betrayed by the same woman. I'm sorry, I said, voice low. This is not your fault. You didn't know. He swallowed hard, composure slipping. Then, summoning a trembling dignity, he said, I must speak to her. Without another word, he marched inside, leaving me alone in the garden, overshadowed by the floral arch. Better ending? The next half hour felt surreal. Guests grew restless, whispering about the delay. Champagne flutes clinked uncertainly. I lingered near the edge, unsure if I should depart. Eventually, a woman in a headset rushed around, quietly ushering guests back to the main house, announcing a postponement. I caught a glimpse of Natalie in her wedding gown, face streaked with tears, rushing across the lawn behind Lucien, who looked furious. My chest tightened with empathy, but also a strange sense of relief that the truth had forced itself to the surface. For once, I wasn't the only casualty. The wedding never happened that day. Many guests left in confusion, polite smiles plastered to hide their curiosity. I retreated to the side lawn, inhaling the scent of crushed grass, tears burning my eyes. What now? The question weighed heavily. My phone buzzed, a text from a friend back home asking if I was okay. I typed a non-committal reply, too numb to detail this fiasco. Eventually, Natalie found me. Her mascara ran, hair undone, white gown trailing mud. She looked more like a tragic bride from a gothic novel than the radiant newlywed she'd planned to be. She approached, voice raw. He called off the ceremony, she said, trembling. He's furious, humiliated. He told me to leave. She paused, searching my eyes. I guess I've lost everything. A wave of sorrow coursed through me, mingled with an odd acceptance. That's what happens when you build on lies, I said quietly, though my tone was drained of malice. She sank onto a stone bench, tears dripping onto her gown. For a moment, I just watched her, recalling the days we were in love, how she once gazed at me with trust. Now all that trust lay in ruins. She sniffled. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know what to do now. The vulnerability in her voice was heartbreaking, but so was the knowledge that we'd never be the same again. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Neither do I admitted. But I'm going home. I won't stay here while you figure out your next steps. I came for answers and I got them. It's over. I stood, the weight of finality settling on my shoulders. She stared up at me, eyes red, wanting to say something, but no words came. Finally, a single tear slipped down her cheek. I understand, she whispered. The next day, I boarded a plane back home. As the aircraft lifted off French soil, I looked down at the patchwork of Paris fading below, reflecting on the whirlwind of heartbreak and deceit. My wife, no, my ex-wife-to-be, found her illusions in the city of light, only to watch them collapse in spectacular fashion. My heart still ached, but at least I had closure. She wasn't coming back, not after this. And I felt no desire to chase her anymore. Life, I realized, doesn't end with heartbreak. It can start anew, shaped by the lessons we glean from betrayal. Perhaps I'd find love again, or perhaps I'd remain single for a while, focusing on my teaching, on rediscovering who I was without her. But the biggest revelation was that I was free from the weight of unanswered questions. I'd confronted the truth and witnessed her illusions crumble, and that was enough to release me from the chains of what if. As the plane soared above the clouds, I closed my eyes, letting the hush of the cabin lull me. My heart still bore fresh wounds, but I felt a strange sense of lightness. The jigsaw puzzle of my marriage would remain unfinished, left gathering dust on the dining table. Perhaps that was a fitting metaphor. Some puzzles simply can't be completed. And that's okay. I'd accept the empty spaces, the missing pieces. Because beyond heartbreak lies the promise of tomorrow, whatever form that may take. And for the first time in weeks, I felt ready to embrace it.